The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Kate Middleton stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the simple black dress she had chosen for what would be one of the most difficult days of her life. Her reflection stared back at her with tired eyes that had shed too many tears over the past weeks. The weight of her decision pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy cloak she could never remove. William had left early that morning for his royal duties, unaware that when he returned, everything would be different. Kate had planned it this way. She couldn't bear to see the hurt in his eyes when she spoke the words that had been building inside her for months. The marriage that the world saw as a fairy tale had become a prison of expectations, protocol, and endless scrutiny that was slowly suffocating her spirit. She walked through the corridors of their home, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Each room held memories of better times when their love felt strong enough to overcome anything. The sitting room where they had laughed together during quiet evenings, the kitchen where she had tried to cook his favorite meals, only to be reminded by staff that it wasn't appropriate for a duchess to spend time in such spaces. The garden where they had once dreamed of raising their children away from the cameras and constant judgment. Kate paused at a family photograph hanging in the hallway. The image showed her, William, and their children, during a happier moment. All smiles and genuine joy. Her heart ached as she thought about how this decision would affect them, but staying in a marriage that was slowly destroying her wouldn't benefit anyone, especially not the children who deserved a mother who was whole and happy. The pressure had started small, like tiny cracks in a window. Comments from the press about her background, whispered conversations among royal staff about whether she truly belonged, and the constant feeling that she was being watched and judged for every gesture, every word, every choice. William tried to shield her from it, but he was fighting his own battles with the expectations placed on him as future king. Their conversations had become strained over recent months. Where they once talked for hours about everything and nothing, now they discussed schedules, public appearances, and royal obligations. The spontaneity that had drawn them together in their university days had been replaced by carefully planned moments that felt more like performances than genuine connection. Kate remembered the night 3 weeks ago when she had tried to talk to William about how she was feeling. They were sitting in their private sitting room after a particularly challenging royal engagement. She had smiled and waved for hours while inside she felt like she was disappearing piece by piece. William, she had said softly, I feel like I'm losing myself. He had looked up from the briefing papers he was reviewing for the next day's commitments. What do you mean? This life, this role. I don't know who I am anymore. I wake up each morning and put on a mask, and sometimes I forget what's underneath it. William had set down his papers and reached for her hand. Kate, you're the strongest person I know. You've handled everything with such grace. The people love you. But do you still love me? She had asked, the question hanging in the air between them like a challenge. Of course I do, he had replied. But there was a hesitation in his voice that cut through her heart like a blade. You're my wife. The mother of my children. The fact that he had to list her roles rather than simply saying yes told her everything she needed to know. They had both become so consumed by their duties and obligations that they had forgotten how to simply be William and Kate, the two people who had fallen in love in a small university town years ago. That night, lying in bed beside him as he slept, Kate had made her decision. She couldn't continue living a life that felt like an elaborate pretense. She deserved to be with someone who loved her for who she was, not for the role she played. And William deserved someone who could embrace royal life without feeling like they were slowly dying inside. Now, standing in their home for what she knew would be the last time as his wife, Kate felt a strange sense of peace, mixed with overwhelming sadness. She had written him a letter, pouring out all the feelings she couldn't express in person. She placed it on his desk where he would find it when he returned from his engagements that evening. The letter explained everything. How she had tried to adapt, how she had hoped the feelings of displacement would fade with time, how she had loved him enough to attempt to become someone she wasn't. But it also explained that love sometimes meant knowing when to let go, when staying would hurt both people more than leaving. Kate had arranged for the children to stay with her parents for a few days, telling them it was just a short visit. She would find a way to explain the changes to them when the time was right, in a way that assured them of both parents' love, while being honest about the new reality they would all navigate together. As she gathered her personal belongings, Kate thought about Camilla, Charles's wife had always been polite but distant, treating Kate with the careful courtesy reserved for someone whose position in the family might not be permanent. There had been subtle comments over the years, gentle suggestions that Kate might be more comfortable taking on different roles or attending different events. Nothing overtly hostile, but enough to make Kate feel like an outsider looking in. Camilla understood the royal system in a way that Kate had never quite mastered. She had waited years for her place in the family and had developed the thick skin necessary to survive the scrutiny and criticism. Kate admired that strength even as she recognized she didn't possess it herself. The palace staff went about their duties that morning, unaware that the woman they had served for years was preparing to leave forever. Kate watched them work. These people who had become part of her daily life, and felt another wave of sadness. There would be no grand goodbye, no farewell speeches. She would simply disappear from their world, as quietly as possible. Her phone buzzed with messages from her private secretary about upcoming engagements and commitments. Kate turned it off without reading them. Someone else would have to handle those responsibilities now. Someone else would have to smile and wave and pretend that everything was perfect, while their own world crumbled behind the scenes. As the afternoon wore on, Kate found herself walking through the gardens one last time. The roses that William had planted for her during their first year of marriage were blooming beautifully. She had loved those flowers, had seen them as a symbol of new beginnings and hope. Now they felt like a reminder of promises that couldn't be kept. Not because of lack of love, but because love alone wasn't always enough. The security team maintained their discreet distance, as they always did, professional and vigilant. They had no idea they were witnessing the end of an era. Tomorrow, their assignment would change, and they would protect someone else, while Kate returned to a life that felt both foreign and familiar after so many years in the spotlight. Kate thought about the woman she had been before all of this began. The girl who had studied art history and dreamed of working in a museum or gallery. The young woman who had fallen in love with a prince and believed that love could conquer any obstacle. That woman felt like a character from a book she had read long ago, real but unreachable. She wondered if William would understand her decision or if he would see it as abandonment. She hoped he would eventually realize that she was setting them both free to find happiness in their own ways, even if that path led them away from each other. As evening approached, Kate made her final preparations. Her bags were packed and waiting by the door. Her security detail had been informed of her departure, though they hadn't been told it was permanent. That revelation would come later, in official statements and careful explanations that would try to present the situation in the best possible light for all involved. The house that had been her home felt different now, like a stage set after the play had ended. She moved through the rooms one more time, checking that she had everything she needed, while leaving behind everything that belonged to the life she was ending. Kate sat in the sitting room where she and William had shared so many conversations and waited for the sound of his return. She wanted to be gone before he found the letter, but she also needed to hear his voice one last time, even if it was just him calling out a greeting to an empty house. When she heard his car in the driveway, Kate felt her resolve waver for a moment. This was really happening. After today, everything would be different. The life they had built together, the family they had created, the future they had planned. All of it would need to be reimagined. She picked up her bags and walked toward the door, her heart pounding with each step. As she reached for the handle, she heard William's voice calling out to her from somewhere in the house. For just a moment, she considered answering, considered running back to him and pretending that everything could go back to the way it was. But she knew that would only delay the inevitable. They had both been pretending for too long already. With tears streaming down her face, Kate opened the door and stepped out into the evening air, leaving behind the only life she had known for over a decade, and walking toward an uncertain but authentic future. The weight of her decision felt both crushing and liberating. She was free, but freedom came at a price that would take time to fully understand. As she walked away from the palace, Kate didn't look back. She couldn't afford to, not yet. The woman who had entered those doors as a young bride was gone, and whoever she would become next was still waiting to be discovered. William stood in the doorway of his study, the letter trembling in his hands as the words blurred through his tears. Kate's handwriting, so familiar and careful, spelled out the end of everything he thought he knew about his life. He read the letter 3 times before the full meaning sank in, each reading making the reality more brutal and undeniable. She was gone. Really, truly gone. He sank into his desk chair. The same chair where he had signed official documents and reviewed state papers, and felt his world collapse around him. The letter explained her reasons with a clarity that made arguing against them impossible. She hadn't left because she stopped loving him. She had left because staying was killing the person she used to be, and loving someone sometimes meant letting them find themselves, even if it meant losing them in the process. William's first instinct was to call her, to beg her to come back, to promise that things could change. But as he reached for his phone, he realized that would be selfish. Kate had made this decision after months of struggle that he had somehow failed to fully recognize. She had tried to tell him she was drowning, and he had offered her swimming lessons instead of pulling her out of the water. The house felt impossibly quiet without her presence. Every room seemed to echo with memories of their life together. The kitchen where she had insisted on making him tea after difficult days, despite the staff's protests. The living room where they had watched movies together. Her head on his shoulder as they pretended to be an ordinary couple for a few precious hours. He thought about their children and felt his heart break all over again. They were at Kate's parents' house, unaware that their family had just changed forever. How could he explain to them that sometimes love wasn't enough to keep people together? How could he help them understand that their mother's departure wasn't about not loving them, but about loving herself enough to choose authenticity over obligation? Over the following days, William moved through his royal duties like a man walking underwater. He smiled when required, spoke the appropriate words at public engagements, and maintained the dignified composure expected of his position. But inside, he was falling apart piece by piece. The irony wasn't lost on him that Kate had left because she couldn't handle the constant performance required by royal life. And now he was performing the role of a man coping well with personal tragedy. The palace staff handled the situation with professional discretion. Official statements were prepared speaking of mutual decision and amicable separation. Words that felt like lies even as they protected everyone involved from harder truths. The press speculated wildly, but the real story remained hidden behind carefully constructed public relations messages. Camilla appeared at the palace 3 days after Kate's departure. Arriving with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood crisis management, she found William in his study, staring out the window at the gardens Kate had loved so much. "William," she said softly, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I heard what happened." He looked at her. This woman, who had navigated her own journey through royal expectations and public scrutiny. "Did you know she was unhappy?" Camilla considered her words carefully. "I knew she was struggling. The transition into royal life is difficult for anyone. But Kate had challenges that were perhaps unique." "What do you mean?" "She came into this family with genuine love and optimism. Sometimes those qualities make the harsh realities of this life even more difficult to bear." Camilla paused, choosing her next words with care. She wasn't built for the level of artifice that survival in this system sometimes requires. William felt a flash of anger. "Are you saying she was weak?" "Quite the opposite," Camilla replied firmly. "It takes tremendous strength to recognize when something is destroying you and choose to save yourself, even when that choice hurts people you love." Kate made an incredibly brave decision. The conversation stayed with William long after Camilla left. He began to see Kate's departure not as abandonment, but as an act of self-preservation that he had failed to support when she needed it most. The guilt of this realization was almost unbearable. He started going through their belongings together, boxing up items that belonged clearly to Kate, while leaving things that might be shared with the children during their visits. Each object told a story of their life together, a book of poetry she had been reading, with passages underlined in her careful handwriting, a scarf he had bought her during a trip to Scotland, still carrying a faint trace of her perfume, wedding photos that now felt like documentation of a beautiful dream that had gradually turned into a nightmare. The children returned from their grandparents' house after a week, and William faced the most difficult conversation of his life. He sat them down in the living room and tried to explain that their mother loved them very much but needed to live somewhere else for a while. Their questions broke his heart. Why couldn't they all live together? Was it something they had done? When would Mummy come home? He answered as honestly as he could while protecting them from the full complexity of adult decisions and royal obligations. Kate would still be their mother, would still see them regularly, would still love them completely. But the family structure they had known was changing, and they would all need to adapt together. The hardest part was watching their confusion and sadness, knowing that his own choices and failures had contributed to this disruption in their lives. He had been so focused on preparing for his future role as king that he had failed to protect the woman he loved from the very institution he was meant to serve. News of the separation became public 2 weeks after Kate's departure. Despite the palace's efforts to control the narrative, the media response was swift and harsh. Some outlets painted Kate as selfish and unable to handle her responsibilities. Others criticized William for failing to support his wife. The truth, as always, was more complicated than any headline could capture. William found himself defending Kate in ways he had failed to do when she was still with him. In private conversations with family members and close friends, he insisted that she had been driven to this decision by circumstances that no one should have to endure. The criticism of her only reinforced his understanding of why she had needed to leave. Camilla visited again the following month, finding William somewhat more composed but still clearly struggling. They walked through the gardens together, past the roses he had planted for Kate years earlier. "How are you managing?" she asked. "Some days better than others." William replied honestly, "I keep thinking about things I should have done differently, ways I could have protected her better." "Self-recrimination serves no one," Camilla said gently. "You both did your best within an impossible situation. Sometimes the system demands sacrifices that no one should have to make." "Did you ever think about leaving?" William asked suddenly. "During the difficult years, when the press was so brutal about your relationship with my father?" Camilla was quiet for a long moment. "Many times. But my circumstances were different. I had already lived a full life outside this institution. I knew who I was, independent of royal expectations." Kate was so young when she joined the family. She never had the chance to fully form her own identity before it became entangled with royal duty. They walked in comfortable silence. Two people who understood the unique pressures of royal life from different perspectives. Camilla had survived by developing an almost impenetrable emotional armor. Kate had tried to maintain her natural warmth and authenticity, and it had eventually become unsustainable. "Do you think she'll be happier?" William asked. "I think she'll have the chance to be herself again," Camilla replied. "That's something worth hoping for." As autumn approached, William began the slow process of rebuilding his life. He focused on his role as a father, making sure the children felt secure and loved despite the changes in their family structure. He threw himself into his royal duties with renewed purpose, though now he understood their cost in ways he never had before. Kate had been granted the privacy she had requested. She was living quietly with friends, avoiding public appearances, while she figured out what came next. William respected her need for space, though he missed their conversations more than he had expected. They had been partners in navigating royal life for so long that facing it alone felt like learning to walk again after losing a limb. The children adapted better than William had feared, though they still asked when their mother would come home. He had learned to answer their questions without making promises he couldn't keep, while assuring them of both parents' continued love. One evening, as William tucked his youngest into bed, the child asked, "Daddy, are you sad that Mummy doesn't live here anymore?" William considered his answer carefully. "Yes, sweetheart. I miss her very much. But sometimes people need different things to be happy, and it's important to let the people we love do what they need to do, even when it makes us sad." "Will she be happy now?" "I hope so," William said, and meant it. "I hope she'll be very happy." After the children were asleep, William stood in the garden looking up at the stars. The anger and hurt he had initially felt were gradually being replaced by a deeper understanding of Kate's decision and his own role in the events that led to it. She had been braver than anyone gave her credit for, choosing authenticity over security, truth over comfortable lies. He thought about the woman he had fallen in love with in university, full of laughter and dreams and genuine joy. That woman had been slowly disappearing under the weight of royal expectations, and he had been too caught up in his own obligations to notice until it was too late. William realized that loving Kate now meant accepting her choice, supporting her right to find happiness, even if it wasn't with him. The marriage was over, but his respect for her courage was just beginning. She had shown him something about the cost of royal life that he would carry with him forever, a lesson that might help him be a better king and a better man. The palace grounds were quiet in the moonlight, but for the first time since Kate's departure, William felt a strange sense of peace. They had both learned something valuable about love, sacrifice, and the importance of staying true to oneself. The lesson had come at a devastating cost, but perhaps it would serve them both well, as they built new lives from the pieces of their shared dreams. Camilla stood at the window of her private sitting room, watching the morning mist rise from the palace gardens. 6 months had passed since Kate's departure, and the royal household had settled into new rhythms. The official separation had been handled with characteristic royal discretion, but the ripple effects continued to shape daily life within the palace walls. She sipped her tea thoughtfully, considering the conversation she had planned for that afternoon. William had requested a private meeting, and she suspected she knew what he wanted to discuss. The past months had changed him in ways that were both subtle and profound. The boy who had once relied on duty and tradition to guide his decisions was becoming a man who questioned the cost of those principles. The press had eventually moved on to other stories, as they always did. Kate's decision to retreat from public life completely had starved them of new material, and William's dignified handling of personal questions during official engagements had discouraged further speculation. The children were adjusting well to their new routine, spending weekends with their mother in her quiet cottage outside London, while maintaining their education and royal responsibilities during the week. Camilla had watched this evolution with interest and, she had to admit, a certain amount of admiration. Kate's departure had been handled with a grace that spoke to her fundamental character. There had been no public recriminations, no tell-all interviews, no attempts to use media sympathy as a weapon. She had simply disappeared from royal life as quietly as possible, leaving behind only the echoes of lessons learned too late. The irony wasn't lost on Camilla that Kate's greatest act of royal behavior had been her decision to stop behaving like a royal. The dignity with which she had extracted herself from an impossible situation had earned her respect even from those who had initially criticized her choice. When William arrived that afternoon, Camilla could see the changes 6 months had wrought in him. He carried himself differently now, with less of the automatic confidence that came from never having his fundamental assumptions challenged. In its place was something deeper and more thoughtful, a wisdom born from loss and self-reflection. "Thank you for seeing me," William said, as they settled into the comfortable chairs by the fireplace. "I wanted to talk to you about something I've been considering." "I'm listening," Camilla replied, setting down her teacup and giving him her full attention. "I've been thinking about what Kate said in her letter, about the system and what it demands of people. I keep wondering if there's a way to change things, to make it possible for someone like her to survive and thrive within royal life." Camilla nodded slowly. "That's a worthy goal, but also an enormous challenge. The institution has evolved over centuries. It doesn't change quickly or easily, but it does change," William insisted. "My grandmother modernized many aspects of royal protocol. My father has brought his own vision to the role. Surely there's room for continued evolution." "What specifically are you thinking about?" William leaned forward, his passion for the subject evident. "More authentic public engagements, less rigid protocol around personal expression, greater privacy protections for family members who aren't direct heirs, a recognition that royal spouses bring their own strengths and should be allowed to use them rather than being forced into predetermined roles." Camilla listened carefully, recognizing the idealism in his words, while also understanding the practical challenges he would face. "These are all reasonable ideas, William, but implementing them would require support from the entire royal establishment. Change of this magnitude doesn't happen because one person, even a future king, desires it. Then how does it happen? Gradually, carefully, with patience and strategic thinking." Camilla paused, considering how much to share of her own experience. "When I married your father, I knew that acceptance would come slowly, if at all. I focused on proving my value through service rather than demanding recognition. Change came, but it took years. Kate didn't have years, William said quietly. The pressure was too intense, and I failed to protect her from it. Perhaps. Or perhaps Kate's experience will serve as a catalyst for the changes you're describing. Sometimes the system only recognizes its failures when the cost becomes undeniable. They sat in thoughtful silence for a moment, both understanding that they were discussing more than administrative reforms. They were talking about the fundamental question of whether royal life, as currently constituted, was sustainable for the people asked to live it. There's something else, William said eventually. I want to ensure that Kate maintains her connection to the children without interference from palace protocol. Whatever our personal situation, she's still their mother, and they need her in their lives. Camilla smiled, the first genuine warmth she had shown during their conversation. That's already been arranged. Your grandmother was quite clear that family relationships should be preserved regardless of official status changes. Kate will always be welcome at family gatherings involving the children, and their time with her will be protected from media intrusion. And what about you? William asked suddenly. How do you feel about Kate's decision? The question caught Camilla off guard, though she supposed she should have expected it. She had been careful to maintain neutrality throughout the separation, offering support where appropriate, while avoiding any appearance of taking sides. I respect her choice, Camilla said finally. I also understand it in ways that perhaps others cannot. Royal life asks for sacrifices that most people never have to consider. Kate made an honest assessment of what those sacrifices were costing her, and she chose preservation over destruction. That takes courage. Do you think I could have done anything differently? You were both very young when you married, Camilla replied diplomatically. You had different expectations about what royal life would require. Neither of you was fully prepared for the reality you encountered together. William absorbed this feedback, recognizing the gentle criticism embedded in her supportive words. I keep thinking about the night she tried to tell me she was struggling. I was reviewing briefing papers. I didn't really listen. You can't change the past, William, but you can learn from it. The next time someone you care about tells you they're drowning, perhaps you'll hear them more clearly. As their conversation continued, Camilla found herself genuinely impressed by William's growth over the past months. The shock of Kate's departure had forced him to examine assumptions he had never questioned. He was asking difficult questions about duty, sacrifice, and the human cost of royal service. I've been wondering, William said as their meeting drew to a close, whether Kate would be open to having coffee sometime. Not to discuss reconciliation or to try to change her mind about anything, just to talk. I miss our conversations. Camilla considered this carefully. I think that would depend on timing and context. She's still healing from the experience of leaving, but eventually, when enough time has passed, she might welcome the opportunity to rebuild a friendship with you. The foundation of mutual respect is still there. How do you know that? Because she could have made your life very difficult when she left, and she chose not to. She could have criticized the institution publicly, shared private conversations with the media, or used her departure as a platform for personal grievances. Instead, she disappeared quietly and has remained silent about her experiences. That's not the behavior of someone acting from anger or resentment. William nodded, understanding the wisdom in Camilla's observation. Kate's grace in leaving had been as remarkable as anything she had done while she was part of the royal family. After William left, Camilla remained in her sitting room, thinking about the evolution she had witnessed over the past months. The young couple who had seemed so perfectly suited for royal life had discovered that love and good intentions weren't always sufficient preparation for the unique challenges they would face. But their story wasn't ending in bitterness or recrimination. Instead, it was becoming a lesson about growth, understanding, and the different ways people could serve the institution that shaped their lives. Kate had served by showing the human cost of unrealistic expectations. William was serving by using that lesson to advocate for change, and Camilla had served by providing perspective and support during a transition that could have become destructive. She thought about the brief smile that had crossed her face earlier, when discussing Kate's departure with William. There had been no malice in that expression, no satisfaction at another woman's failure. Instead, it had been recognition of a difficult truth successfully acknowledged. Sometimes, loving someone meant accepting that they needed something you couldn't provide. Sometimes, supporting an institution meant recognizing where it needed to change. Camilla understood better than most that royal life required a particular type of resilience. She had developed that resilience over years of public scrutiny and private struggle. Kate had discovered that she possessed different strengths, ones that were equally valuable but not well suited to the specific demands of royal service. As evening approached, Camilla walked through the palace corridors, noting the subtle changes that had occurred since Kate's departure. Staff moved with perhaps slightly more awareness of the human impact of their protocols. Security arrangements had been adjusted to better protect family members' privacy. Small modifications to public engagement formats allowed for more genuine interaction with the public. These weren't revolutionary changes, but they represented the kind of gradual evolution that Camilla had described to William. Kate's experience was becoming a case study in how the institution could better support the people it asked to serve. The children's laughter echoed from the family quarters as they played before dinner. They had adapted to their new reality with the resilience that children often displayed when adults handled difficult situations with honesty and consistency. They understood that their mother lived elsewhere now, but that both parents loved them completely. They had learned that families could take different shapes while maintaining their essential bonds. Camilla reflected on how this experience had changed her own role within the family. She had become an unexpected source of institutional memory and practical wisdom, helping others navigate challenges she had faced in her own journey toward acceptance and belonging. The evening news carried a brief mention of William's attendance at a charity event, noting his continued dedication to royal duties despite personal challenges. There was no mention of Kate, who had successfully achieved the privacy she had sought. The story that had once dominated headlines had become simply another chapter in the ongoing evolution of a family that happened to live their lives in public view. As Camilla prepared for dinner, she thought about the different definitions of success that this experience had revealed. Kate had succeeded in preserving her authentic self. William was succeeding in learning from failure and advocating for change. The children were succeeding in adapting to new circumstances while maintaining their security and happiness. And perhaps most importantly, the institution itself was succeeding in demonstrating that it could evolve when faced with honest feedback about its limitations. Change was slow and sometimes painful, but it was possible. The palace settled into its evening routines, a place where ancient traditions coexisted with modern realities, where formal protocols made room for human needs, and where the lessons learned from one woman's brave choice continued to influence how royal life might be lived by future generations. In the end, Kate's goodbye had broken more than just William's heart. It had broken open assumptions and expectations that needed to be examined, creating space for new understandings about love, duty, and the courage required to choose authenticity over comfort. Camilla's smile that evening was genuine and knowing. Sometimes, the most important victories looked like defeats to outside observers. Sometimes, the greatest service came from those who chose to step away, rather than compromise their essential selves, and sometimes the most profound changes began with a single person's decision to value truth over tradition.